I feel like I've been up all night. But why are my legs so heavy? It's the bathroom again. This is the second time today. It's not about age. It's a sign that your heart is already very tired. I never knew that the foods I thought were good for you would actually be a burden. Have you ever woken up in the morning and felt your legs feel heavy, as if you'd been walking all night? Even though you hadn't, many people believe that simply eating a light diet, consuming plenty of vegetables, and frequently eating warm soup in the winter will keep them healthy throughout their lives. But that's not true. There's damage that happens very quietly, often unnoticed. It's like a water purifier filter that's been used for too long. Water may still flow outward, but inside, it's already full of debris, and one day, even the slightest pressure will cause it to burst. The same goes for our kidneys. When we're young, we can endure and filter out unnecessary things. But once we reach our 50s or 60s, things become more complex. Many people only realize they have a problem after their leg is severely damaged, when their blood potassium levels are high enough to threaten cardiac arrest, and when their body's ability to protect itself has long since passed. But there's good news. If you're listening now, there's still time. Just by eating right during the winter and making a few small lifestyle changes, you can significantly reduce the burden on your kidneys. In today's story, I'll explain why seemingly harmless foods can be dangerous and how you can protect yourself without complicated procedures. Before you continue, if you're interested in kidney health and mid to long-term health and want to live healthier into your later years, please follow the channel, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like more detailed and in-depth information, please leave a comment with the number 1, and I'll read it and share it with you. In this video, I'll talk about a reality that many older Koreans face every winter. Even though they believe they're eating only the best foods, their kidneys are getting weaker. And the most important question is this: could you be on that path without even realizing it? My name is Yoo Jin. I'm a specialist with over 30 years of experience, currently working at a university hospital. There's one face I'll never forget. It's Mr. Lee Jong-sik, a man in his early 20s, sitting in front of me in the clinic on a bitterly cold winter day. That day, he smiled awkwardly and said, "I thought I'd be healthy for the rest of my life if I ate well." That smile was filled with bitterness and deep confusion. A week ago, during a bitter cold snap, the elderly man visited the hospital with heavy legs. He was a keen exerciser, going hiking every morning and always boasting of his stamina, even in the cold. So, when his legs felt unusually heavy, he simply assumed it was stiffness from a cold. However, the test results were anything but simple. His kidney function had already dropped to a dangerous level, and his blood potassium levels were so high that even a little delay could have led to a serious condition. What shocked the elderly man and his wife most was the fact that they had never been reckless in their eating habits. In fact, they had been very careful about their diet. When the winter winds began to blow, his wife, Mrs. Park, would always be busy in the kitchen, preparing the warm soups familiar from their Korean meals. Dried wood was softened, seaweed was thoroughly boiled, and bone soup was meticulously simmered for hours over low heat. All of this stemmed from a simple desire to keep her husband warm and healthy during the winter. In their minds, and in the minds of countless families, these foods were symbols of care, love, and health. We have believed for decades that vegetables are rich in fiber, and that warm soup is good for blood circulation. Elder Lee Jong-sik was confident that with this diet, he would be able to survive any winter. However, his body was already quietly sending out distress signals. After hiking, his calves felt stiff, as if they were going to burst, and at night, he would wake up with shortness of breath and a racing heart, making several trips to the bathroom. At first, he simply attributed this to his age. He considered it the natural toll of time. But those signs were anything but trivial. When I held the test results in my hands, I immediately knew the problem wasn't laziness or excessive eating habits. The problem was that his kidneys, which had been working tirelessly for over 70 years, could no longer handle the things that had been considered healthy in his youth. The familiar, hearty winter foods had become too much of a burden for his already exhausted kidneys. I held their hands and told them that this was by no means their fault, and that countless others were experiencing the same situation right now, yet they didn't realize it. We never learned that even the same food, the the same preparation method, could have completely different effects on our bodies depending on our age. And winter is the season when these differences are most evident and most dangerous. Mr. Li Zhongsik's story isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to remind you that your body always sends signals before it's too late. If we recognize these signals and take timely action, we can avoid many serious consequences. That's why I'm telling this story. I hope that the winter family dinner will no longer quietly become a source of health problems. After reassuring Mr. Li Zhongsik and his wife, I began explaining something many people have never properly heard. The problem isn't whether or not we eat vegetables or whether the food is traditional or not. The core of the problem lies in how our kidneys have aged and how winter forces them to work in a harsh environment. When we're young, our kidneys are like water purifier filters. Even if we eat a little less, or if we consume a little more potassium or phosphorus, they can filter it out and excrete it through urine. However, after 50 or 60 years of continuous operation, that filter isn't as smooth as it once was. The feeling of being like a woman is sweet and clogged, and even a small excess can be a huge burden. Winter makes the situation even worse. When the weather gets cold, the body constricts blood vessels to maintain body temperature, reducing blood flow to the kidneys. Blood pressure tends to rise, but the kidneys are forced to work with less fuel. Eating foods high in potassium, sodium, and phosphorus in this situation can overwork the kidneys. Elderly Zhongsik didn't know this. He simply thought eating hot, traditional foods was a way to take care of his body. The first food I mentioned was silic, a vegetable that many Koreans dry in preparation for winter. Many people believe that chalejijiji is rich in fiber, good for digestion, and very mild. This isn't wrong for younger people. However, the drying process evaporates the moisture from the vegetables, concentrating the minerals. The potassium and phosphorus content in celery can be 3 to 5 times higher than in raw vegetables. For already weakened kidneys, this potassium is like a cyanide bomb. Unexcreted potassium builds up in the blood, causing hyperkalemia, which can lead to heart rhythm abnormalities, muscle weakness, and even sudden cardiac arrest. The problem isn't that celery is bad. It's that aging kidneys can no longer safely process it. The second problem is green juice. Many people drink green juice made from ground green vegetables like kale or spinach every morning, believing it detoxifies the body. However, for people with weakened kidneys, green juice is one of the most dangerous ways to consume potassium. Grinding vegetables destroys the cell walls, releasing the potassium inside, which is then rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream. A single cup of celery is equivalent to injecting a large amount of potassium into the body in just a few minutes. In conditions like winter, when blood vessels are constricted, this rapid absorption doesn't give the kidneys time to respond. Many people think they're doing a good job, but in reality, they're seriously overloading their kidneys. Third is aged kimchi. Many people believe they can eat it safely as long as they wash it thoroughly or lightly blanch it. However, aged kimchi is very high in sodium, and sodium is a direct enemy of the kidneys. Sodium raises blood pressure and damages the tiny blood vessels in the kidneys. Furthermore, substances produced during long-term fermentation can irritate the kidney's lining. Younger kidneys can tolerate it, but for older people, every meal of aged kimchi becomes a battle the kidneys must endure. Fourth is seaweed soup. This familiar soup is considered a symbol of nourishment and care. Seaweed is rich in iodine and potassium. Eating it occasionally is not a problem, but if you eat it every day, especially if you drink all the broth, your kidneys will have to process a lot of dissolved minerals. This senior citizen believes that broth is the healthiest and always has a bowl. It was completely emptied. However, that very broth contains the highest levels of sodium and potassium. Aging kidneys can no longer filter it as quickly as they used to, and the burden builds up day by day. Finally, bone broth, considered the essence of winter, is ox bone, soup, or gomtang. Many elderly people drink it to strengthen their bones. However, broth made by simmering bones for a long time contains a lot of phosphorus. When the kidneys cannot excrete phosphorus, phosphorus draws calcium from the bones and deposits it in the blood vessels. As a result, the bones become weak the blood vessels harden, and blood flow to the kidneys decreases further. A dangerous vicious cycle is created without the person even knowing it. As I explained this step by step, Mr. Lee Jong-sik and his wife sat in silence. They did not argue, but simply sighed. All their actions were born from concern and the beliefs they had learned. I told them this was not a criticism, but a warning. We're living longer, and so our eating habits must adapt to our age. I emphasize that I'm not suggesting we completely cut out these foods. The issue isn't whether we eat or not, but how much we eat, when we eat, and how we eat. If we continue to eat as we used to, our kidneys will continue to send distress signals. However, with proper understanding and regulation, we can give our kidneys sufficient rest and avoid dangerous complications. And then I said that there are definitely vegetables and diets that keep our bodies warm in the winter without overloading our kidneys. But before we get to that, the most important thing is to change our perspective. Not everything traditional is always right, and what was good for us when we were young isn't necessarily good for us as we age. After listening to my explanation, the old man fell silent for a while. Then he asked the question many of his patients always ask. Does that mean we should stop eating vegetables altogether? I smiled and shook my head. The problem was never vegetables. The problem was how we had been eating vegetables when our kidneys weren't what they used to be. I told them that if we eat them correctly, vegetables can be a friend, not a detriment, but rather a way to give our kidneys a break. I explained to them a very simple ratio. Your kidneys are like your water filter. When it leaks, it can filter even slightly cloudy water cleanly. However, if you continue to press dirty water against a filter that's been in use for decades, it will quickly break down. The only way to extend the life of an old filter is to make the water lighter before it passes through. The same goes for your kidneys. We need to reduce the burden on our food before it's absorbed into our bloodstream. The first and most important principle I emphasized was that vegetables must be discarded after boiling or boiling. Winter foods to avoid many people feel bad about drinking water made from vegetables in the winter, thinking that vitamins are dissolved in it. However, for those with weak kidneys, this water is a liquid that contains potassium and oxalic acid that have already been eliminated. Drinking it again is no different from reintroducing the burden into the body. I told Mrs. Park that simply boiling vegetables in water can reduce the potassium content by 30 to 50%. Afterwards, simply rinsing the vegetables briefly in cold water will greatly improve the kidneys. The second rule was to never drink pureed vegetables. I clearly explained that green juice, which many people consider a panacea, is actually the food most feared by aging kidneys. Blending vegetables releases all the minerals at once, allowing them to be absorbed almost immediately. The kidneys don't have time to process them slowly. Conversely, chewing thoroughly slows digestion and absorbs minerals little by little, allowing the kidneys to keep up. I advised Mr. Lee Jong-sik to put away the blender and trust his own wisdom. The third principle is the timing of vegetable consumption. The kidneys work actively during the day and need to rest at night. Eating plenty of vegetables rich in water and potassium in the evening forces the kidneys to work all night long. This is why older people have to go to the bathroom multiple times on cold nights. I advise them to eat vegetables primarily during lunch when they are most active and to reduce the amount in the evening to allow the kidneys to fully rest. Only after thoroughly explaining these three principles did I begin to talk about vegetables that help the kidneys breathe better in the winter. The first is winter radish. In Korea, there's a saying that water is like medicine. Radish aids digestion and reduces the amount of waste the kidneys have to process. When the digestive system is functioning properly, the kidneys don't need to replace the intestines. I recommended drinking water that's gently cooked and warm and eating it raw in the winter to avoid a cold stomach. Second, there's iabak, a very common but undervalued vegetable. Iabak is high in water, but its potassium content isn't excessive and it's easily digested. It gently helps the body eliminate waste without putting a strain on the kidneys. I suggested lightly stir-frying it with simple seasonings or making a light soup to avoid sodium. Third, there's eggplant. I explained that the purple color of eggplant comes from anthocyanins, which help protect microvascular cells. Since the kidneys are made up of countless tiny blood vessels, Protecting these blood vessels is also protecting the kidneys. However, eat eggplant only steamed or gently cooked, and avoid drying it, as this concentrates the potassium. Fourth, there's Napa cabbage. Compared to aged vegetables with leaves, Napa cabbage has soft, easily digestible fiber. It helps the intestines excrete waste, ultimately reducing the burden on the kidneys. I advise them to quickly blanch it in boiling water, lightly coat it, and eat it with dried vegetables, reducing their intake of soup. Finally, there's perilla leaves. I explained that their unique aroma not only enhances the flavor of food, but also has a mild antibacterial effect, helping to reduce the risk of urinary tract infections. A healthy urinary tract also protects the kidneys. In winter, it's better to lightly blanch or steam perilla leaves rather than eating them raw. I looked at Mr. Lee Jong-sik and said, if you simply change the types of vegetables you eat and how you cook them, your kidneys won't have to endure daily stress. There's no need to reduce your intake or fear eating. Just eat wisely, according to your current body. As we left the hospital, Mrs. Park told me her heart felt much lighter. It wasn't because she'd found a miracle drug, but because she finally understood what her husband's body needed. To me, that was the most important thing. With a proper understanding, we no longer need to fight our bodies. Instead, we can walk calmly and long-term with them. 3 weeks later, when the door to the examination room opened, I recognized Mr. Lee Jong-sik immediately. The difference was evident in his gaze. He walked in with a much lighter gait, his face flushed, and he wore a natural smile I hadn't seen before. The first thing he said wasn't about the test results, but a very ordinary remark. Doctor, I put on my socks this morning, and they didn't leave any marks. To many, that might seem trivial. But for me, that was the clear sign that my kidneys were resting properly. Subsequent test results confirmed this, and I began feeding them vegetables that were less taxing on the kidneys. Their blood potassium levels returned to a safe range, and their kidney function stabilized, no longer worsening. Above all, what pleased the elderly man most was that he could sleep soundly through the night without waking up even once. He no longer had to fumble to get up in the freezing cold to go to the bathroom. He hadn't taken any new medications or had any procedures. He had simply changed the ingredients on his daily meal. Mrs. Park, sitting next to him, smiled as she listened to the elderly man's story. She said she initially worried that she wasn't providing her husband with enough healthy food. However, after changing the ingredients, including replacing the vegetables and lightening the seasoning, within a few days, she noticed that her husband was eating better and feeling much lighter. The dinner table was no longer a place of quiet worry, but once again a time for warm family gatherings. I told them both that this story showed them one very important thing. While kidneys are not organs that can be completely restored when severely damaged, we can protect and maintain their remaining functions, depending on how we treat them. We don't need cheap things or miraculous promises. We just need to understand where our bodies are at in life. But before we leave, there's one thing I absolutely must emphasize. Food is never a substitute for the medications prescribed by our doctors. As our bodies begin to feel better, many people wonder if they can reduce or even stop their medications on their own. This is very dangerous. This senior citizen once asked me if he could stop his blood pressure medication. I firmly said no. Food provides the foundation for supporting the body, but medication remains an essential pillar for maintaining stable levels. I also mentioned that those taking anti-diabetic medications should be especially careful. Some green vegetables, especially leafy greens, are high in vitamin K, which can interfere with the effectiveness of medication. The key is not to completely avoid them, but to maintain a consistent daily intake and consult with your doctor. Furthermore, the approach should vary depending on the stage of kidney disease.